Teachers of Reddit, what was the moment you realized, this kid is gonna be a serial killer one day? Went to school with a kid called Michael who strangled himself in class with a shoelace. Like purple face and forcefully doing it. One time he broke his arm and had a cast. Got into an argument with another kid and he just started bashing him with the broken arm. Really hard. The teacher tried to get him to leave and go to the principal's office. He refused, so she moved the entire class next door and left him there. So he barricaded the door and started trashing the classroom. The projectile monitors, ripping whiteboards off the wall, flipping tables. After 30 minutes the police arrived and he was coloring in, bouncing his feet looking happy. Waving to kids outside the window looking in. The police broke the door down and he jumped on the table then attacked them. Never saw him again after that one. Dude was nuts. Edit. I remember too, before he barricaded the room an assistant teacher, for kids with issues, went in to talk to him and he started kicking, punching her. She ran out and that's when he started barricading the room in a fit of rage. One of the more memorable moments was when we were testing and had those folders blocking everyone from looking at each other's paper and I guess he got frustrated that he wasn't allowed to play a game so he started getting pissy. At first it was just yelling and the teacher trying to shush him. Then he started raging and smacked down everyone's folders, jumped on all the tables, ripping up papers, etc. Then the teacher tried calming him down and he grabbed the yoga ball and threw it at her. She then had us go stand outside but not before we saw him throw a chair at the teacher too. We looked through the glass and could see him throwing around the books everywhere, slamming down desks, full-on rampage. I think after that the teacher left him in the room and asked another teacher to get the assistant principal before he was pulled out. He still stayed with us through the year and mellowed out at times but he always reverted to his natural ways. Was in my office one day when a kid I'd never met before strolled in. Very quickly I recognized by his behavior that he was a BD, behavioral deficit, student who somehow got out of his class. He started a conversation with me asking who I was and what I did. I could tell he was trying very hard to get under my skin as he emptied a box of tissues one by one. So I didn't react. He then kicked over a number of trash cans so I didn't react. He went into my office bathroom while talking to me with the door open, not to use it, and started messing with the supplies in there. I walked over so I could get a clear view. He then tried to pull the sink off the wall while telling me that he has compulsion issues and has a really hard time not doing the things he thinks about but knows are wrong. He said last year he was expelled from his school because he threw his desk at another student. He told me sometimes he imagines what it would be like to brutalize and murder someone. Eventually he tired and realized the sink wasn't coming down. I kept talking to him and asked if he would like to help me clean up the mess on the floor or if he wanted to go back to class. He helped me clean and then I took him for a walk back to his class. That kid took a lot of work over 4 years by a lot of people. Therapy and medication included. He eventually learned impulse control and learned the differences between craving negative and positive attention from people. He left BD and got to be in general classes, became an athlete, got some real friends, and graduated. I honestly cried when I saw him get his diploma. I hope he stays healthy. Finally a happy ending. Leaving this thread now before the happy is ruined. You couldn't have handled that situation more beautifully. He was looking for you to respond to his behavior and when he realized you weren't going to respond, he gave up. You showed such confidence and control he ultimately understood his efforts were in vain. I was this kid. I remember the teachers and staff that made me feel like things were going to be okay. The teachers who alienated me made it so much worse because they were just like the people who hurt me at home. 9-year-old chasing an 8-year-old with a brick in each hand trying to smash the other kid's skull in. When I stopped him he was screaming something about how he was going to kill the other kid. He's probably 13 now and I suspect in jail or killing animals for fun. Preschool teacher for a very wealthy community. I have a 3-year-old who is physically violent. The first day I had him in my class he attacked me. I tend to get down on the floor and play with the kids. Seeing an opportunity he latched onto my ear and tore little bits of flesh with his tiny fingernails. I bled. I tried talking to his mom. She says, yeah, he gets rowdy. Just this past week I had him in my room again. He delighted in making another boy cry. Refused to participate in our activities. Only wanting to throw toys directly at my face. Once I did convince him to participate, he clung to me. It was bizarre and honestly made me very sad. I talked to some other teachers who've known them longer. Apparently mom and dad are serious alcoholics. He is an only child and desperate for attention. They all know about his outbursts and violent tendencies, but there's really nothing anyone can do because he is 3. I'm just going to try my best with him. Maybe a positive influence and some consistency will give this little guy some reassurance. I know that there are people who are mentally ill and born with issues beyond their control, but I think this kid just has bad parents. Wish me luck, friends. Sounds like they might need a visit from social services. Therapist here. They do, and it needs to be reported. Even if they screen it out or find nothing in their investigation, the documentation of concern is extremely important. Plus, aren't teachers mandatory reporters? Chances are, the mother was drinking during pregnancy too. Fetal alcohol syndrome can do some ugly things to the brain. It's the most common cause of mental disabilities. So yeah, probably bad parents and born with lasting issues because bad parents. My cousin drank a shit ton and smoked at her baby shower, and the baby has a bunch of mental problems, including fetal alcohol syndrome, along with pretty weak lungs. Not a teacher but a therapist who used to work for a state hospital for children, but now left. I had 4 kids. Kid 1. He was a 13-year-old who had severe aggression and ADHD. His parents were divorced, dad wanted nothing to do with him, and mom was an overprotector who was a holistic medicine dermatologist who demanded I call her doctor, name, every time I call her. Their son was hospitalized due to him beating up small children and fighting teachers. He was at my state hospital for a week where he would terrorize staff and children, and would cause lockout between security and him. I tried calling his parents, but his dad had our number blocked. I knew this because when I called him on my phone it rang longer, he answered, then hung up. When I called him again, it said number not in use. And his mom only answered the phone late in the evening outside of work hours. Mom would get stories about what would happen at work and she demanded to get a call from me. One day we finally got a call from mom and she's screaming at me on how she, sweet little boy, was a victim of society, and I'm a horrendous therapist. She told the boy everything. The boy said, "Lol. My mom said you suck. I'll be out of here soon." Mom removed him from the hospital where he was hospitalized by Child Protective Services again. The state called me to ask why did I discharge. I told them he was discharged due to parents removing him from program prematurely. Last I heard kid was in juvie and mom is trying to buy him out. 2. I had a 9-year-old who severe aggression. He held grudges and promised to kill other kids. He was sent to my hospital after choking a kid unconscious. I barely got back from a 3-week vacation and my supervisor had this kid unassigned for 3 weeks with no paperwork filed such as notes, intake, progress, and so on. They threw him in my caseload. 1 week later my supervisor demanded I release the kid because he'd been here long enough. I fought against it because this kid wasn't improving from what I heard. They discharged him instead. Kid was returned to us a week later after trying to kill the same kid again. 3. This kid was 12 years old who was exposed to porn and sexually molested by older women for 6 years because his father thought he was gay. This kid would masturbate in the hallway to shock people, grope other kids, sneak in a phone and watch porn loudly, tried to remove the tops on some girls or pants them. He wasn't on my caseload, but the therapist in charge of them quit on the spot and walked out because they demanded help with this case and many others. She was denied. She left to protect their license in the long run. The hospital discharged this kid to a lower level of care where he tried to rape another client. 4. One kid who was 12 was the definition of a sociopath. He just loved to hurt other kids. He one day grabbed the balls of this kid with autism. The kid with autism shouted with a loud scream and beat the sociopathic kids to a bloody pulp. Sociopath kid recovers after 3 days. is readmitted to our program where he goes back to the same kid just to touch his balls again and gets a second black eye. He never cried, he never got scared, he just loved what he did. I'd like to say there wasn't one defining instance but more of a long list of them that when everything was over and I had time to relax and process everything did I come to the realization that in 20 maybe 10 years time I'd see this little boy as a teen or a man on the news for murder. I had this one student, let's call him Timmy. Timmy was prone to extreme violent outbursts for little to no reason at all, and they were so unpredictable that I had to set up a Timmy evacuation protocol with my other students in case I felt their lives were in danger. These are some of the times I had to use this protocol. Before Timmy was banned in my room from using pencils and safety scissors, he went on a rampage with a pencil. He was trying to stab another classmate because I helped her with her writing before him. He was doing his writing just fine, and seconds before that, I had told him, "Great job, Timmy. I love how you are keeping your letters on the lines." He didn't need help, and he never once asked for it. Thankfully, the little girl was not hurt as I was right there and was able to throw my hand in front of her face where he was aiming. However, he did get me and the pencil lead was left in my hand. Timmy attempted to choke another child because that child was using a red crayon, so instead of getting an identical red crayon from the bucket in front of him, he tackled that child out of his chair and put his hands on his neck while screaming like a banshee. About a week after the choking incident, he was upset because he wanted to be the only one in class, so he pushed a shelf that I, as a grown adult, have trouble moving over in an attempt to, in his words, squish his classmates who were working on the carpet. Thankfully, I was able to hold it up while they ran. He proceeded to destroy my entire room, to the point where I decided to just move classrooms for the day as it would have been impossible to clean it up, and frankly I didn't want my already traumatized students to come in and witness it. Every single day, this child would have a violent meltdown. Some were more contained to himself, a small area, or me personally. Edit. I am a UPK teacher. This child was 4 years old. My wife, the staff of her school just got done dealing with a kid kinda like this, also 4. The thing that makes it so incredibly frustrating is how much the parents continuously deny that anything is wrong with the kid, which, I understand nobody wants their kid to be messed up. I do, but come the fuck on, and just how long this shit had to go on for, almost an entire year, before the school finally put their foot down and kicked them out. My wife thinks her best friend's son is going to grow up to be a serial killer, and, while I think she tends to overstate things, it's hard to deny that there is cause for concern. I've gotten creepy vibes from this kid since he was a toddler, less than a year old. He's probably 6 or so now, but was kicked out of most of the preschools in their area for being violent towards other kids. At one point a couple years ago he got very fascinated by death, squishing bugs to see what would happen and talking about stabbing himself. The mom, my wife's friend, is concerned and has taken him to doctors to try and discuss, but hasn't gotten much in the way of help. But I don't think they've pursued strongly much in the way of psychological specialists. The dad, who has become very right-wing, seems to not be overly concerned, and his solution seems to be either Catholic or military school when the kid gets older. Which to me sounds like it would do more harm than good. Future mass shooter this one. My son is adopted and he used to have very violent outbursts like that and went to a special school for kindergarten, age 5, because of it. Especially when his counselor and lawyer started probing a little more into the abuse he faced with his bio family, so it's like he was reliving the abuse. He's 8 now and only has violent outbursts maybe once or twice a year, and they're usually towards me, which I prefer because I know how to handle them. For the most part, there's only ever a predisposition. If you look at most serial killers, often they suffered an injury likely to cause brain damage as a child and/or grew up in unhealthy home environments. Quite often both. Timmy is young enough, he almost assuredly just needs help. Whether or not he gets it is a different thing, but there are after all pro-social psychopaths. I was sexually abused from age 1 to 5 and used to bully other kids in kindergarten and first grade because I felt scared of the world. I remember flying into a rage because of a Halloween song that had the line, "I'll pull down your underwear." I made some awesome friends in first grade and second grade and was still paranoid but didn't get physical unless it was self-defense. I was even awarded Most Improved in second grade for it. You would be shocked to see just how strong kids who are in a rage can be. I'm a teacher and I've seen a kindergartner take down 4 adults who were trying to restrain him. She was a little angel student when my boss was in the room, but the second the door closed, she tilted her head, stared at me, and said, "I want to hurt you." Her eyes were absolutely lifeless. She was 8. She was also very frequently violent to me and other students, teachers. This is chilling. I'm also a teacher, and while nothing violent happened with this kid, I also looked into a kid's eyes one time, and saw absolutely nothing. It was like there was no soul in there. He was a run-of-the-mill disrespectful child, with a reputation for being a troublemaker, but I never actually had an incident with him. However, I have never forgotten the day I made eye contact with him, and the coldness and emptiness in his eyes scared me so bad. I have never felt so creeped out. I've taught Prec, 4 to 5-year-olds, for years. Only one kid has ever really scared me and I wish I knew what happened to him. He'd be high school age by now. He used to talk about hurting animals a lot. We had several conferences with his family but they swore he never did that at home and never hurt an animal despite so many times of him talking about it at school. He had zero effect most of the time, no smiling or laughing. He would be sneaky about hurting other kids, pinching or things like that, and have no remorse when he did something wrong and wouldn't deny it either. Completely dead behind the eyes. I've never had another kid like that. Even the violent ones who have hurt me or destroyed my room have had emotion and remorse at some point. Not him. There was a kid in my elementary school who used to abuse small animals. In high school he got super obsessed with serial killers and was caught trying to make poison brownies and give them to kids at our school. I was one of those kids, as were 2 of my classmates in one class, but we didn't eat the stuff he offered us. He admitted that he targeted us because he knew that we had a history of suicide attempts and thought that it wouldn't look suspicious. His little sister annoyed him so he killed her kitten. Maybe not a serial killer but let me talk about James, name changed. He would most certainly one day explode on society as things didn't work out the way he wanted. James was full of temper tantrums. On an average day he'd go through usually 2 to 3 over the most mundane of things. James was 5 years old so should have had a grasp on this, but we'll go into why at the end. James had to be first in line, every time. If he wasn't he was screaming, fighting and in a panic. When we designated a student for first he had to be second and the same above would happen. When he was first, he'd push and yell at the other students. It made lining up hell. James would make messes and demand fairness. Oftentimes reverting in a hysterical temper tantrum of spitting, hitting, and crying if another student who was near him didn't also clean up. He had a weird way of eating with just his hands. It didn't bother me, but when the other teacher asked him to use a fork, he'd pick up the fork with one hand and just move it up and down while continuing to eat using just the other hand. James was clever and vindictive, often asking to go to the bathroom when we were going outside, or the class was chaotic. When he'd go, he'd either steal something or break other students' creations. He also had a fascination with toothpaste and toothbrushes, especially of other students. He would often try to clean the toilet bowl with the other students, and dump the toothpaste in the bath. You'd think he'd be sick all the time because he didn't wash his hands but he managed to build up a good immune system because James licked the ground, a lot. And almost everything else especially if he was feeling vindictive or provocative. The hardest part though was the absolute lack of participation of his helicopter mother who blamed everyone else for her son's problems. When we worked with the father, he and the other teachers created a present system. If he was good and listened in school then he got a present at the end of the day. Father stored the presents in the car but when the mother came, she didn't care and let her son open up all the presents defeating the whole purpose. She also actively talked to her son about how much she hated the school and teachers. Which meant every painfully earned inch with her child, turned into miles and often the trust built between us was turned back. They were eventually expelled though as the mother, to prove a point of her distrust, started to drop him into random classes in the school, ignoring some teachers, yelling at others, and pushing him in randomly to classes and leaving him like that. Usually mid-temper tantrum and curled up somewhere in the school for us to find or another teacher to deal with. Oh man, that kid is 100% the way he is because of his mother. I reckon he'd turn out just fine if Dad had full custody. My own mother was extremely emotionally volatile. She was physically violent as well, but as I became older and stronger, freakishly strong in my rage, she'd have my brothers beat, kick and punch me instead. Not to control my outbursts, mind you. I would only fly off the rails and get violent after someone hit me first. I had terrible tantrums as a kid, because she had even worse tantrums, as a woman in her 40s. The older I got, the more I realized she wasn't right, and acting like her was bad. By the age of 8, I stopped being physically violent with anyone, unless they attacked me first. By 12, that never happened outside of our house. And my verbal outbursts were gone by 13/14. I have the opposite problem now. I have a hard time getting angry, because I don't want to hurt anyone, physically or mentally. It's been decades, but I can clearly remember how incredibly vicious I could be. An intelligent teenager, pouring all her anger, pain and sadness into targeting whatever weakness I could sense in the other person. And my mother had trained me well when it came to spotting weaknesses. I'm certain I won't physically hurt anyone for no reason, but I had to defend myself from an attacker a couple of years ago. He was much taller and stronger than I was, but I fought back so hard, he gave up. Zero regards for my own safety, I just wanted to hurt him. Physical violence is still a trigger. Someone laying their hands on me, no matter how much bigger they might be, a switch just flips. I've gotten good at controlling it, so I very rarely act on those feelings. But when someone physically attacks me, the kind, compassionate person retreats, and there's this primal anger, almost immediately. When the attack is severe enough, like with that guy, all I can feel is this overwhelming need to hurt my attacker. As in, bash his skull in. In my defense, he was trying to choke me. The more extreme the attack, the more extreme my reaction becomes. It's still in me, I know that. I just need to trust in myself, and fully realize that the wounds don't control me, and they definitely aren't me. And maybe work on my sense of self-preservation. P. For those of us who grew up in evil homes, this is 100% what it's like. Thank you for sharing this. Evil is the right word. The things I mentioned weren't even almost the worst things that happened. But they are things that could have made me an awful person. If you can, find help. Dig deep, really, very deep. People like us, we didn't just not get the happy, supportive family that teaches you how to be a social, well-adjusted and successful adult. We were stuck, for years and years and years, constantly surrounded and hurt by evil. Essentially having to reprogram our human nature, because it is, and should be, in our nature, to have a community. The foundation is missing. I'm in my 30s, and only now starting to learn how to ask for help. Everything, from the heartbreaking to the mundane, I've had to do myself. I'm really good at getting shit done by myself. But I'm really bad at acknowledging when I don't got this. When I am exhausted, and could really use a friend. And I suck at realizing that even if I do got this, I don't have to. I have people that care about me. Which is weird. People who worry about me. Which is a first. Like I said, we are not our wounds. Wherever you are in your process, good luck. I firmly believe there is hope. 5 years ago I had a second grader who was horribly violent. I couldn't get a straight answer as to his home life and I was the new teacher so there was a lot kept from me. He would attack classmates with whatever was handy. Since I was the art teacher I'd see his class 1x a week. I had to pre-cut everything, not use pencils or brushes because they were potentially weapons. I learned by process of elimination what not to put out and my cabinets had to be locked. One day I caught him trying to stab a girl on the head, walking slowly arm raised. Another time he had a chair ready to bring but down on another kid's head. I grabbed the chair and he full-on attacked me. Bit me, split my lip, punched, kicked. The principal let him walk it off. The following week he told his classmates he was going to try and kill me. Again, nothing happened. This kid had serious brain issues. The wiring was off. His eyes were dead or malicious. His movements were methodical for a child. I know that children who act out are usually victims of trauma, but this kid was born with something wrong. The worst part? Everyone knew he was dangerous but just basically ignored him. The principal told me to just watch him but not to neglect the other 23 kids. I left that crappy job. Oh, and F you, Jennifer L., principal of the elementary school. You are a piece of crap for allowing kids at that school to do whatever the hell they wanted with zero consequences. No wonder 8 of us quit that year. Kid was whispering to the boys he sat next to. Had no idea until one had a breakdown about how no one loved him and the other started bedwetting and having panic attacks about going to school. This was emotional brutality, and what the teacher referred to as the last type of bullying he was trying out before he would be isolated from the other kids if he showed no remorse. When this boy was spoken to, he smirked the entire time. Thought it was funny. Never wanted to punch a 7-year-old before or since. He'd make friends with stupid kids and make them do violent or damaging things for his amusement, then watch as they got into trouble. I went overnight from normal teaching assistant to policing that boy's every move all day. If his eyes weren't on his work, he was being told off. He was not allowed to interact with younger children or children his own age. Older kids didn't put up with him. It seems cruel, but he had been like this for 3 years, and every other option had been exhausted, to the detriment of every child this boy came across. The only interaction he was allowed was group work, and it was closely supervised. He was expelled from every secondary school he went to. His mother went bald from the stress. Parents were the sweetest people. They tried so hard. And he was in juvie from 14 to 18. He does multiple petty crimes and damaging things. Last I heard he had to go into hiding because he organized a bunch of traveler kids he had befriended to help steal a quad bike. When they were chased down, the bike owner got macheted. The bike owner was his cousin and was a hard A. It could be that he's actually not in hiding anymore and his cousin recovered and found him. I've told this story before, but I was once watching 2 young students playing. Igor would put a box on Tom's heads and then Tom would take it off and they would both laugh. Igor repeated this a few times and finally Tom put it on Igor's head and Tom laughed. Igor, still with a smile on his face, picked up some Christmas tinsel, removed the gold bands revealing just a wire and then wrapped it around Tom's neck and pulled it back like a garrote, strangling for a moment before I could break it up. It wasn't the only incident and he was expelled from the school after leaving scars from multiple clawings of other students. His mother in tears couldn't seem to understand the problem and blamed the school because we weren't strict enough, and that he behaved well at home because of how strict the father was. They were 4 years old. When I was 10, a boy at my table found a pill bug during recess and befriended it. He named it Polly and brought it inside. All of us who sat at that table decided to take care of Polly. We gave it water in a bottle cap and made a little space for it to hang out. Not even an hour after, a boy from a different table comes over and asks if he can hold Polly. He was friends with the kid who found it, so of course Polly was placed into his hands. He immediately crushed and killed it, laughing. We were heartbroken. I used to teach at a military training school, where the new recruits would go after basic training to learn their specific job. One student I had was insanely smart, like always made perfect scores and had a degree in some technical field. But he was super racist, sexist, showed no emotion, and said he wanted to have our *pay dungeon in his house someday. He ended up getting kicked out for insubordination and stalking. No idea where he is now. My roommate at college was like this. Very smart. Chemical engineer. No emotions whatsoever, unless he was drunk, which happened more and more frequently. Had gallows humor and nobody could tell if he was joking. Was prone to violent outbursts, e.g., playful pool wrestling would lead to him pulling you under and leaving you under for a very long time out of nowhere. One night, a joke about fighting made him pull out a knife and corner me in the bathroom after I got out of the shower and just had a towel around my waist. He had that crazy Jack Nicholson stare, and said, "Let's fight." I tried to de-escalate by going about brushing my teeth. Luckily, a wonderful police unit got involved later and probably saved my life. They later relocated him to a different building. He was in one of the age windows for developing mental illness, and I think something was eating him. He was getting more violent and drinking much more by the time he finally snapped. He reminds me so much of the guy who stabbed those 4 people to death in Moscow, Idaho a few months back. That guy had the exact same symptoms. Anyways, I really hope the university police alerted the FBI about this guy and they are keeping an eye on him. I'm waiting for the day I see his name in the paper. If he gets his hands on certain materials or weapons, I could see him doing something terrible someday. Absolute callousness and coldness of how he interacted with anybody. He had no soul whatsoever. He was constantly suspended, kicked out, reinstated just to be suspended again. Zero conscience. The summer after his junior year, a girl who just graduated was found partially burned and stuffed in a trash can in town. I immediately thought of him. Turns out he raped and murdered her. He's in jail forever. Not a teacher but the meanest, most malicious, vindictive, manipulative child I ever knew growing up did not become a serial killer. Nope. She became an influencer. Lol, my school bully became an influencer too. I'm kind of scared of what she'll become when she's no longer relevant as an influencer, or when her looks fade and fail to bring her the attention she craves. Alt account, am a teacher. 1. When they would attempt to stab a student out of the blue. As in, no anger, no tantrum, no sadness. Just sitting there calmly and then acting. And then having absolutely zero emotions after. Not crying, not having a tantrum, just blank. That emotionless void is the scariest. 2. The eyes. It's always the eyes. On a side note, blame shifting has been an increasing issue. As a teacher, I am obligated to first report to my higher-ups if there's any issues. Once they step in, my hands are effectively tied. Luckily, my administration usually takes the proper actions, but other administrations have not, and it's frustrating. I've also seen it from the parent side, where parents assume that the teacher or another student has made their child make the bad decision, so the kid knows that their parents will back them up no matter what. Conversely, ones who have reacted so harshly over a minor thing, like forgetting homework, that you can see why the kid just gives up and does whatever the hell they want. I had a student a few years ago where the parents would actively brag about throwing away all of their holiday presents in front of them, because they got a B on a test. We called CPS, they found nothing. The student was savvy enough to realize that their parents were crazy, so they just did worse and worse things because no matter what they did, the punishment was extreme and over the top. Bottom line, parents have more sway than teachers over discipline issues that negatively impact the education and safety of their own child. If your child is coming home reporting of horrid tales about a child, confirm it with other parents, then start calling. Teachers can't talk to you about other children, but if you know how to read between the lines, they will often let things slip that they shouldn't. The teacher might tell you something like, "I understand what you are saying, and I urge you to call the principal and let them know your concerns." That's code for, "I'm not allowed to confirm nor deny, but please call and help me out here." The teachers have probably done everything in their power, and if the child is on an individualized education plan (IEP) or something, their hands are tied. Schools fear negative press. I hate to say it, but that's sometimes the only way to get a severely disturbed child out. Had a student arrested for attempted murder. Only reason it wasn't murder was because the victim fought hard. I was 0% surprised when I heard it. I'm not going to give any details, but within the first 5 minutes of interacting with this kid in class, it raised the hair on my neck. I don't know how to describe it, but it's something about the way they talk. There's a cold confidence to it. They weren't very intimidating physically, which made it more unnerving to see that confidence in challenge and saying hurtful things to others. They don't talk to you as much as they talk at you. There was a pleasure they found in saying hurtful things to others and having zero remorse ever. He was also extremely smart and knew it. So I wasn't a school teacher, I was a head teacher as childcare for 6 years. The first 2 years I was in the preschool room and floated to the older kids, 6 to 12 years, before I went to toddler permanently. I had this kid who was a foster child. Came from a really bad background. His mom had 5 kids. 3 youngest were boys and were his father's kids. The 2 older girls were his father's stepkids. Reading their reports, I learned his father would rape the older sisters and mom would allow it, and he would beat the boys. Further reading, it stated this kid had microwaved their cat. He had bad behavioral issues. Further down in the report, when his social worker would come take them to talk to them, he ended up putting a chair through a window. In the classroom at the daycare, he would purposely shit his pants. Tell other kids he was going to kill them and grabbed them by the neck. He's told me he was going to hurt me, with straight eye contact. He would fly off the hinges so bad my boss would have to retrain him until his social worker got there with police and his foster parents. I always said we were going to be on his hit list in a few years. Him and his brothers were adopted by their foster parents and ended up moving away. I don't know how he's doing now or what happened to him. He has obviously been through horrendous trauma, and I hope he got the help he desperately needed before he ends up seriously hurting someone. Went through a student's classroom iPad, which we had permission to do at our discretion, and found he had Googled my name, my parents' names, my house address, my parents' house address, and photos of me from college. I don't know, man, when I was 9, I would Google everyone and everything. Just for funsies. I'm not a teacher, but I have seen one kid who I know is already a psychopath when he was 5 years old. My ex-GF's son would kill her kittens, hold them up and squeeze them. Real issues. He is probably 11 now, but one day I will read about this kid. Not a teacher, but a kid in my class at elementary school was so unpredictably violent that the whole class was afraid. He was quickly excluded from any games because he always took it way too far, like ramming kids to the ground while playing catch or kicking someone when he found them while playing hide and seek. He ended up breaking another kid's arm by pushing him down some stairs unprovoked while we were all quietly walking to the school gym. It was right after we had all been told about an incident where a child from another class had climbed over the railing, fell on the stairs 1 floor down and had broken his skull. The kid from my class laughed when he heard that. Apparently he thought it was so funny he just had to try doing that to someone for himself. His dad always paid for gifts and trips for the whole class, which, looking back, was obviously meant as a bribe so he would become more popular. Or maybe to get back into the good graces of the teachers who obviously must have thought something was extremely wrong at home. He left during 2nd grade, proudly exclaiming he would be going to special school, run by the army because he was special. Now as an adult, I know there's no elementary schools run by the army or doing army training in my country, and I suspect he was sent to some boot camp boarding school abroad. These threads always make me wonder how young kids come to the idea of violence in the first place. I was lucky enough in my upbringing that I was genuinely confused the first time another kid attacked me in school, because there was no model for violence or extreme anger in my life. I quickly responded to the girl attacking me with a vehemence that surprised me. I'm sure most of us have that inner tiger, but having that tiger triggered so often it's normal for you at an early age, that's a scary thought. I was one of these kids. I was sexually and physically abused as a kid. Even now as an adult I struggle because I was programmed to turn my feelings off so easily. So let me tell you, it's not always the parents' fault. Well, at least to the extent people assume. Some kids are just that way. Sadly, I was one of them. You see, as far back as I can remember, and even before that, I was a very angry child. I would lash out at others for no reason, and many times if someone were to help me if I got hurt, or fell down, etc., I would get so angry I would attack whomever was helping me. I left 3 scars from my fingernails on my brother's face after he tried to help stand back up. And at the time, my father was never in my life, very loving. I did have 2 other older brothers that were jerks, and didn't become abusive until later on life. But I can think of no reason why I was such an angry and aggressive child. I will admit, my mother, like many other parents, never taught me how to handle my emotions. It was just, don't do that. without showing me the proper way to. Eventually, as me and my two other brothers got old, and they became more abusive, I retreated into myself and became a very antisocial shy kid. 'Cause when you're the youngest, everyone is older, taller, and stronger than you. So there wasn't much use in putting up a fight. Point is, when at the time of my aggression, there wasn't really any explanation why I was that way. There was a boy like that the year below me in primary school. This was in Scotland about 40+ years back. He was okay a lot of the time but had frequent unpredictable violent outbursts, several weekly. My only run-in with him was when we passed in an empty corridor. I didn't look at him, had never even talked to him, and suddenly I found myself lying on the ground looking up at the ceiling. He'd lamped me in the head from behind. Fights certainly weren't unknown, but it was pretty much unheard of for younger kids to attack older ones or vice versa. But he did that a lot. Not that didn't also attack those in his year and younger. Eventually everyone had enough. The school didn't kick him out, the kids did. Literally. Once lunchtime he attacked a girl and then every other kid, probably a couple of hundred, got together, surrounded him, physically picked him up, dumped him outside the school gates and wouldn't let him back in. We formed lines to block the gate and pushed him away when he tried to come in. The teachers took him off somewhere for the afternoon and he never came back. We heard he ended up going to another school about 10 miles away. Hope he got the help he needed. We had that student. He seemed okay at first, but progressively, I realized he was very manipulative. Like he would act completely different depending on who he was with. He would try to embarrass teachers when parents were around. Like, "Do you remember when you said X in class?" X being the most twisted possible version of the sentence, out of nowhere, completely out of context. That kind of thing. Then girls began to come to us, reporting stalking and bullying behaviors, that kind of stuff. When confronted by his favorite teacher, his own words, his own mother said that everything that teacher said was gold to the boy, he shut down completely and that teacher became a butthole in his mind and his mother's. She defended him, putting the responsibility of his behavior completely on the girls, saying the school was persecuting him personally, etc. He finally changed schools. At the end of the last school year, we saw his picture in the newspaper. He was accused of extortion, sexual, on minors. He's probably like 20-something now, and something about child P. Police were looking for more victims. Zero surprise on our end. Kid in 5th grade, 11 years old, very intelligent and in gifted classes. He would torment the other gifted kids. The only time I ever saw his creepy, dead-eye, jack-o'-lantern smile was when he made another kid cry. He would do things like finish a book over the weekend that the other kid was reading just so he could come in and spoil the ending. He researched some country that this kid's grandparents came from and called him a Nazi. It wasn't Germany, can't remember. The other kid's parents did the nice kid thing, just ignore him. And God love them, these kids tried. He would chase them on the playground just to say creepy stuff. Anyway, I came in halfway through the year. I called a meeting with the parents and school social worker. They said the other kids bullied him. I kept a bunch of papers that he wrote about blowing up the school, blowing up the White House and making way for a new species of human. He is definitely going to kill prostitutes or hide bombs somewhere. After he went to middle school there were a bunch of bomb threats. I notified the principal about his behaviors and sent copies of the papers he wrote. Awkwardly, his father worked at the middle school. Anyway, they stopped soon after that. He would have graduated by now and I have no idea where he is. But when he kills people, I'm going to the news with all my documentation and show that I tried to get him some help and no one cared. What can you do? Not a teacher, but a home educator. A kid turned up to a few of the same groups my kid was in for a few years. Every week there was a new story from the kid's mom about their area. Someone's been poisoning dogs in the park behind their house. Local press involved. There's been a surprising amount of dead birds in their garden. Must be the mobile phone masts. Isn't it odd that 3 cats they've had have all broken the same leg then gone on to disappear within a few months? After the first couple I started looking over at her kid when she told these stories and there was just something off about the reactions. I dunno. Like the kid was enjoying hearing this story. Like, I've got a secret, kind of look. This kid was 10 to 14 when I knew them. I've not seen either of them in the best part of a decade, so no news is good news, I guess.